around the 12th or the 13th century in Europe, long ago, not so long ago, whenever long ago, the point is around 12th century, when there was only one denomination of the church, which is Catholicism in Europe, the relationship between the church and the rulers was an extremely tense relationship. Because the church effectively is based on the doctrine that human existence is divided into two kingdoms, kingdom of the earth and kingdom of heaven. The church has monopoly over kingdom of heaven. Rulers are allowed to rule the kingdom of earth. But since earth is subservient to heaven, the ruler is subservient to the church. Therefore, a tussle goes on for close to 3 to 4 centuries between the church and Christian rulers, not just rulers, Christian rulers. During this entire period, what happens is that kings try to take over the property of the church to control its ability to interfere with administration. Hid money as much as possible so that the church's ability to comment on administration comes down, so that the power that they wield over society comes down. And then the church also does a few things wherein apologies, confessions are sold for money. So a general, let's say, frustration or angst against the church as an institution starts building in European society. That gradually leads to the Reformation movement with Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King Jr., but Martin Luther, who is the founder of the Lutheran brand of denomination of Christians, and who are mostly, if you see Lutheran denomination, you'll find it in Germany for God knows for what reason. So he begins a movement of Reformation where he challenges the monopoly of the church. When he starts challenging the monopoly of the church, he then comes out with a protest against Catholicism, which results in the Protestant movement. A protest against the manner in which the Catholic Church operates, controls all religious aspects, and basically says you shall not have access to salvation unless and until you go through the church, specifically the Catholic Church. He tries to break that monopoly of the Catholic Church on salvation and all other aspects of religious behavior as well as non-religious behavior. That Reformation movement results in several Christian states of Europe choosing sides, some choosing the Catholic Church's side and some choosing the Protestant side. Results in a huge fight, multiple treaties, and the final treaty is what we know as the Treaty of Westphalia. So the Treaty of Westphalia was not some kind of a political treaty, it was fundamentally a religious treaty wherein the monopoly of the Catholic Church over Christianity was completely broken. And for the first time, the treaty recognized that Christianity shall henceforth have two denominations, Catholicism and Protestantism. Now, once you do this, the concept of separation of the church and the state comes from that treaty, which is to say, the Catholic Church will not interfere with the rights of individual European rulers to decide whether they want to be parts of Catholic Christianity or Protestant Christianity. So therefore, separation of the church from the state is basically, it still retains the Christian character. It only says the Catholic Church will not tell us whether we should be Catholics or Protestants. And the ruler of each European state will have the power to decide whether he wants to be on the Catholic side or on the Protestant side. But the concept of secularism in Europe never meant give up Christianity. That the state shall have no identity. The state shall have a Christian identity, the ruler shall be a Christian. The only difference is whether he would be a Catholic Christian or a Protestant was the distinction. Compare that with what we are being told about secularism in Bharat. European secularism translates to retention of the Christian identity. It only says you will remain equidistant from denominations. Why? If you happen to have a Protestant minority population in a Catholic majority state, then there must be safeguards to protect the interest of those denominational minorities. And therefore, the majority-minority concept in terms of protection of the rights of the minority is to be traced to that particular situation where minority Protestants had to protect themselves against majority Catholics and vice versa. However, the existence of a minority Catholic in a Protestant majority state would not require the state to give up its Protestant majoritarian identity and vice versa. So they were entitled to have their own identities. And I'll give you a simple comparison. Think of it as fights, let's say a fight between Vaishnavites and Shaivites. If the king happened to be a Shaivite and you had a minority Vaishnavite population, he would have to safeguard their rights, but that doesn't mean he would have to give up his own Shaivite affiliation. And he would still be a Hindu king, but with a Shaivite identity, who basically says, I will employ laws in such a way that they're equidistant from both sects. This is not Dharma Nirpekshata, it is Pantha Nirpekshata. Dharma Nirpekshata means I don't have an identity, I am equally distant from different religious identities. Pantha Nirpekshata means I have a religious identity, but I am equally distant from the Vaishnavite and the Shaivite. Secularism, when exported to Bharat, like every other European export to colonized societies, was meant to divide the society and to prepare it for ultimate conversion. Secularism is the intermediate step before you give up your religious identity altogether. And this is a documented, intended, let's say, strategy that they themselves say in their correspondence. Why is it that the definition of Europe of secularism in the mothership, which is Europe, allows them to retain their national religious identities, but when it is exposed to countries like Bharat, it results in countries like Bharat having to give up their civilizational identities and religious identities? Why? Which is why I use the words consciously, the myth of secularism, because what has been perpetrated on us is a mithya, which has got nothing to do with the original story of secularism in the mothership, namely Europe. So the next time someone says secularism means separation of the church from the state, please ask that blessed idiot to explain why does it speak of church and the state? Why not any other institution? Why does this concept speak of the church? Because the history of secularism is the history of the church. Hence the words separation of the church and the state. Second, the other compromise that was struck between the rulers and the church as part of this principle was, since the territory of the church will be separate from the territory of the king in terms of the jurisdictions, the king shall never be allowed to appropriate property of the church. In this country, what it is translated to is the appropriation of temple property by the secular Indian state. So it was meant to ensure that the king shall never have the right to interfere with the financial independence and autonomy of the church. It has taken the exact opposite consequence in this country. For all practical purposes, we are glorified Macaulay Putras and Putris who have zero understanding of how these concepts have devastated our society fully and entrenched unnecessary concepts in the heart of the society, hopefully not forever. And idiots on social media fight on saying, you are secular, I am pseudo-secular and ulta. Arey, don't give up the concept altogether. Because secularism in its truest form and definition is incompatible with Hindu philosophy. It is incompatible with Hindu ethos. It is incompatible with Hindu administration. Because Hindu governance is based on the concept of Rita and Dharma. The king is seen as the torchbearer of Dharma.